So people have so many questions about drugs.
Mm,
And so we'll get to that.
mm,
But before we get to that, I would like to hear more about your background because
mm.
I think that is completely fascinating. And we could spend the whole time just talking about your studies, but the people really want to hear about the drugs. So I'm really curious about, and then you shared with me a story that I want to hear more about. When you were studying chemistry, would we call it pharmacology? Was that a
Mm.
field that you wanted to go into?
Yeah, I mean, I did spend some time, especially in college, studying pharmacology specifically. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not in. But yeah, I also during my when I was training as a doctor, I thought I wanted to sort of develop new antidepressants and work in a lab. So I'm not sure which. Yeah, it's played a role in different times in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was at that point in your life, and you were thinking about wanting to create new drugs for depression? What were some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and especially to start off with. So um, I think we'll sort of see that are relevant to, I think, other things we'll discuss today. So I think at that time, I often think about now the the sort of triad that we hear a lot in, I think, the spiritual wellness world of mind, body, spirit. And so I think at that time in my life, especially sort of middle of my medical training, which was, I, we're talking now 2007-ish. So that was 27 at the time. I was very, I think, educated, and I'll put that in quotes because I thought I was finding a solution or the solution of understanding humans, human suffering, pain, as I was training to be a doctor. And I thought that the problem and the solution came from a problem with the brain. And so the way to fix it would be to balance neurotransmitters, or to that, or that the illnesses or ways of suffering to begin with were due to problems in neurotransmitters or their receptors. And so I'd sort of drank the Kool-Aid of, yeah, Western medicine, I think I could say fairly, and Western psychiatry. Or I don't know if there's not non-Western psychiatry, Western medicine and psychiatry, that, yeah, our problems lay in the brain structure, and what it's making. And so, and the reason I throw that mind, body, spirit triad in there is because certainly if anyone had talked to me about spiritual things, soul playing a role, I would have just laughed at the time, certainly. And so, yeah, and certainly even body, the role of the somatic, psychosomatics, that also was, I probably would have laughed at that too. It was so out of, you know, scope of what we were being taught. And I would say those latter two, still body, spirit, are still pretty untouched in current medical training. And so at that time I was wanting to help and wanting to help others and wanting to help myself. And so that's why my interest in being a scientist and a physician scientist was a focus at that time.
Yeah, I remember the day that we met,
Mm.
and we got to talking, and somewhere in there, I was revealing to you my deep desire to have gone to medical school and to have figured out some path for me. And I think you're the first doctor that's ever really said to me, maybe not necessary and maybe not the best. I would still argue that with your training and your accreditation, you're actually able to reach people now in a much different way. So I still appreciate the letters.
Maybe we can trade jobs for a day and just see what it's like.
Please.
See what it's like. No, that's funny because I think I've actually, I remember when I was doing, when I've done public speaking and, sometimes before in podcasts or whatever it is, I used to, there was times I was starting by saying, nothing that I'm going to say that is I think of real help and relevance, and the conversation, or I sometimes used to say that to patients, did I learn in my medical training, and that I would say the most relevant things are I had to unlearn really what I was trained in. So, and I actually, looking back, I feel like my wanting to emphasize or maybe de-emphasize how the importance or the problems within Western medicine and how they hinder us, and in a way, it was a response to my own what I used to feel were hindrances in my life, almost like I wasted so much time, I wasted so much money, on the education. There were so many years of sleepless nights, and really I feel like I mean I was in school for 15 straight years, right? I got my MD and a PhD, and so when I saw that what I had spent my time doing wasn't the solution, it was quite painful, because I wasn't like an overnight, like, oh, okay, like I'm just gonna go be work with psychedelics, because that was very not in the mainstream in 2013 when I first got exposed to it. So it was actually in a way saying, if and this is happening pretty unconsciously, it was like, if I'm willing to say that this stuff really doesn't work, like I have to own up the fact that I just spent 15 plus years investing in this. And so it was this thing I've been letting go of. And actually, so yeah, now I think I'm in a more balanced place where I'm seeing kind of working with the system, right? So the system is such that wider culture, this stuff is still important. It feels relevant, and there are aspects of it I think that are important, meaning in science and medicine, but there's many things that are not. And so I'm sort of seeing it as working with the system, and certainly, yeah, that I have a voice, and some people listen to that voice because I'm speaking the language almost of humanness, having the degrees. So now I'm seeing it more, yeah, being a bit gentler on myself and my previous choices, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that even people that are very open to all types of things, I think that the Western mind is so trained at such a young age to listen to the science, to, it's like we've got that part of our mind that even the most open people, there's that part of the brain that like needs to see the studies, needs to hear from accredited people. And that I imagine that your accreditation and your training, I mean, among doing many other things that we're not even touching upon, but I would imagine that just that, especially in the work that you do, allows someone to let go and to trust in a way that,
sure,
would not happen.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is I often think about, what we think of under the umbrella of healing, or, I like to use the words transformation or evolution. That when we're doing that in relationship, which I think is the main way we're doing it, whether it's a relationship between us and a therapist or us and a doctor, us and another person, is that like there has to be enough commonality and enough difference for there to be actual evolution and transformation. So I think if there's only commonality, then we're just preaching to the choir. If there's only difference, we're fighting. And so it's that medium of where, yeah, there's enough overlap to trust, as you say. Yet there's enough difference to be able to actually look at our perspectives, look at the other person's perspectives, and yeah, and evolve.
Yeah. this is an unfair ask, but I'm so curious to hear what I get out of this question. Um, could you whittle down? I know you studied Jungian and Freudian.
Mm.
At this point in your life, um, could you distill down the essence, your take, not their essence, your take on the essence of those people and their teachings and that method and the value?
Sure. And yeah, because I was really focused on Freudian psychology and Freudian psychotherapy, or really what's technically called psychoanalysis, is really pervaded in Western culture. I would say, if you go to most therapy, I mean, there was like Freud, and then there's branches of what came off, and a lot of what is, if you think of the different things like CBT, or there's like um, DBT, there's all sorts of therapies now that people have created. Most of them stem from either Freud or Jung. Mostly from Freud, though. I would say, I don't know the numbers, but I would say probably 97, 98% of therapists in this country, even though they're specialized in different things, it's from the lineage of Freud. He really had a tremendous, tremendous impact. And I would say he represents what I would say is the mind focus of Western culture and mind, body, spirit. When we think of that, it's almost like there's an imbalance right now, I would say, of mind. And so, but I also want to start off by saying there was a lot of overlap between them. I mean, Freud was Jung's dear, dear mentor. I mean, they were friends, they were close for a long time, but then they started having rifts over what I'm going to say is going to be the distinctions, which we'll get to in a moment about Jung. So the commonalities, I think, that are major that still pervade therapy is a focus on the unconscious, that there is an unconscious, that it's worth looking at. Like that was very, very novel at that time. And that dream work was also a very major thing that they both, in Western culture, I'm sure there was other cultures that far before them looked at dreams and thought of different reasons why they're relevant, but they both felt that dreams could be helpful for healing. Then they started diverging really in what I would call the bucket of what we call spirituality or these days, where Jung sort of took things further. I mean, he was his mentee. There was an age difference. There was a mentor-mentee relationship. So they certainly did not see each other as colleagues. And so, for instance, like four major things that I think distinguish Jung from Freud is one, I would say, is actually the role of dreams. So or what they thought of them. Like Freud really thought they were a way of looking at sexual drives, unconscious sexual drives. Like that was a huge thing for Freud, which was sort of left behind. I don't even think even those branches these days of therapy that stemmed from Freud even believe that anymore. But Freud was really all about like, oh, our sexual repression drives our behavior. And so he really saw dreams as being like, oh, the point of them is to uncover these unconscious sexual drives so that we could help people. And Jung took that much, much further. And again, so he became, in all four things I'm going to say, I think it's under the buckets of spirituality. He thought about them as potential premonitions, like he connected them to things that, that they could potentially tell the future, into synchronicities, that they're, this was an opening potentially to another, to a collective unconscious, that there was something much, much bigger happening there. And so let's say that's a major way that how they looked at dreams. I would say another thing is that the relationalness of the relatability between the therapist and the patient, I don't love that word, but we'll use it, is that there was a distance that Freud felt. It was like an analysis. It was like, there's the patient, that's the problem, here's the therapist. And you can see it almost in psychoanalysis, which I did for almost 4 years, which is like the most traditional way of practicing psychoanalysis is on the couch. So you're laying on the couch, the therapist is behind you, so you're not even like looking at each other, which I think there. So one can postulate why Freud was, I would say it was uncomfortability or familiar or even a fear of saying I'm not part of this, right? Where Jung was very much like, no, there's a relationship here. There's a thing happening in the room that's very real between these two people. And then there's branches now that have stemmed of relational types therapy, etc. But that was a major thing that they clashed on. I would say another one would be, that again represents Western culture, is that there was, like, Freud, I would say, sort of looks like what Western medicine and psychiatry looks like these days, which is there's a problem to fix. Like there's a diagnosis and we need to treat. And so that just sets up that there's a problem and then there's a solution. Versus Jung looked at things much more like there's an evolution. There's a bigger thing happening here. We're trying to become whole. We're this human experience is about discovery and change, and not so much that there's a problem. It's just more, how do we expand? So it was less pathological or pathology related. It was more exploration. And so those are the three sort of major things that I think about. And the underlying tone of that is the spirituality, right? Which is that there's this bigger thing happening here. Like Jung traveled a lot to Asia and India. He practiced yoga, which Freud didn't really do any of that. So I sort of think about, again, so I myself sometimes have like put them like kind of against each other, where there was a lot of overlap, but really kind of Jung took it a direction that, Freud, for only reasons we can postulate, didn't like or conflicted with him. And so that's when they split and sort of did their thing. And I think it's like that uncomfortability or fear of the spirituality is why Western culture took it on, because we thought we were getting it perhaps from Christianity. But now we're seeing kind of with psychedelics, and Jung is kind of making a comeback, or Jungian analysis, or things that stem from Jung. People are becoming much more interested in it.
Have you ever, do you resonate with Jung more?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he was groundbreaking. I think many of the things he did and proposed, and yeah, I mean, we're certainly still learning from him. I mean, also just like Freud, there's things that in traditional Jungian, current Jungians would be like, no, that was like, there was problems with it. I mean, Jung did have sex with patients. He did. There's people that were just that he thought that was a form of healing, and that was okay. And so meaning both Freud and Jung, the way people practice today that would identify as either, is very different from how they used to. But I would say that the openness to this, what I would I keep going back to this triad of mind, body, spirit, I think is much better received and encompassed with Jung. And I'm going to say that it's the balance between those three that I think is important, because just the way I would say that Western culture as a whole has imbalanced towards mind, is that we can see and give examples of unbalance into body and also imbalance into spirit, right? A lot of the things that we would call, I'm sure everyone listening, spiritual bypassing, would be when we don't honor the body or we don't honor the mind, right? It's really about, they don't really conflict. It's more about balancing and having them have conversations with each other.
And do you, so musicians I feel like have, there's like a world of spirits out there giving them inspiration. My husband's a musician, and I've had pretty powerful dreams of dead musicians that are in my dreams trying to reach him. And I know in Ayurveda, there's this thought that there's like this spirit realm of, I'm forgetting, I'm forgetting the name of them, but there are like these Davic doctors that exist in this realm. And so when an Ayurvedic doctor will practice, they will tune in, do a prayer, and that realm of doctors are in there helping them to help you. Do you feel like there is a realm of doctors or spirits out there that help you in your realm and your colleagues?
No, I'm just, it's just that that could open. I mean, I can talk for hours about that. It's something I think a lot about. But the fast answer to what you're saying is yes. I don't know if I would call them healers per se, but do we have helpers and connections to conscious beings in other realms that we're not able to sense with acceptable senses, meaning especially like eyes, ears, touch, etc., that have a role in our personal evolution and journeys, and yeah, in the evolution of the world. Yes, so absolutely. And yeah, meaning because I've actually thought quite a bit about this. I mean, I can go on all sorts of tangents, but I think for me it was I mean, I worked with a medium, or I'd say I work with a medium. She's become really a mentor. I don't know if do you know Elise Lunan from Goop? I think you do, right?
Oh, yeah. Do you work with Carissa?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So she's
yeah, Carissa too.
yeah. So I mean, to me, like that, my work with her. I mean, I wouldn't say I was maybe curious. I would even say maybe curious about mediumship before Elise introduced me to her. And I mean, sounds like you've worked with her. I mean, it was like there was life before and after. I mean, in an instant, I was like, there, she channeled my father who passed away and 14 years ago. Like meaning there was no doubt left. Like it wasn't. There was no like, could she have looked this up on Google? It was like I had to like go and actually some of the stuff she told me about asked my mom about, and my mom was like, no, this so meaning there was kind of life, yeah, before and after. So I mean, like in when I think about Carissa, I think about how this, I know I'm going on a tangent, sorry, but it's like when I think about the human experience, there's certain things that are very fundamental to being human, like um, the three major things I think about are time, time, space, and matter. And so again, I feel like I'm going on maybe a bit too much of a tangent. But when I think about Carissa, right, these, and when I say those things, time, space, matter, they seem very unchangeable to us, right? We're born, we're gonna die. There's a wall in front of me that I can't run through. But people like Carissa, I feel like, are able to navigate those three things, time, space, matter. And it's kind of her 9 to 5, just the same way I do healing work or whatever. So she's able to touch into these other places. And she's actually, I would say, connecting with those things that and some of those beings that you're referring to, or entity. I don't know what to call them, beings, entities, whatever, that are healers, that are helpers in our evolution.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there must be a special, like a specific class of entities that if there's another realm, it's like, well, they are specifically working with, I don't know what we want to call psychologists. I don't know. I feel like there's like a realm for musicians, a realm for artists, a realm for physical doctors, a realm,
Yeah.
my guess is that you'd be like, they're deeply in touch with you. Maybe they've even taken over your life.
Yeah. Are you saying with us like this is what happens with people, or it's more so certain people, or?
Maybe you. Maybe
Oh,
you.
okay. I just
Certain
wanted to
people.
clarify that question.
Yeah.
I would say that I believe that, and again, this is something when I keep talking about, like, I mean, that even what you just said before meeting Carissa, I would have laughed at that. So in some ways, there's this you're seeing this pattern of this, what I would agree with Jung, which is this ongoing expansion and evolution. And oh, now I got it. And then like I'm like 3 years from now I'll be like, oh no, like I had no idea. Like, and so I would say, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting. I do in the astrology that I have been following, and actually Carissa also, she sent me a message earlier just after New Year's that was kind of that I'm something that I've identified with for the last 19 years specifically is going to be changing big time this year. And it was interesting because when I look back 19 years, I was in my first year of medical school. So it's I'm really, you know, and to think, I was talking to my girlfriend yesterday about like what being a doctor, how big a part of that my identity that has been is really potentially, I don't know, like I'm open to my life looking very differently in terms of what I do day to day or who I identify as. And I do think that there are other energies or conscious beings at play here. And, you know, it's interesting. The more I've read into this, and I think we all have them. It's more really about, I don't think that like healers have them or spiritual guides or mediums have them. It's more just how in tuned or how in tuned we want to be with them. But they're always there, you know. And the more I started sort of looking into this, whether it was, you know, work with Carissa or even Christianity, like esoteric Christianity. I'm not talking about sort of current Catholicism or something, but and I have another spiritual teacher named Ron, who he's from a lineage of Christian esoterics, mystics, and I was really seeing how much overlap there is between all these different things. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because, you know, what we're calling these helpers, you know, in Christianity, like people talk about, what's the term? Yeah, archangels and all these other things. So I think, you know, I don't think we're talking about anything new. And if we actually look back at some of these teachings, they all have them there and they don't actually conflict. It's more about like, you know, the naming and what people think, and I think that's why there's more conflict. But I think there's actually much more overlap, and yeah, a lot of these different ways of understanding the world.
It's just, you know, it's just very recently that we don't ask them for help in like a normal everyday kind of way. It's actually a practice that I started a few years ago, and I often ask for help. The first time I did it, and I was like, oh, whoa, that really worked. You know, I'm always like asking for help in a more ceremonial way, but in this more like immediate, like I need help now. And you kind of always receive the help. There was a moment when I was birthing my daughter in my living room, and it was just like, whoa, actually, this is so big and intense. And I had there's an audio recording, and I remember it, but I screamed out and I said, somebody help me now. And I was not talking to my husband or the midwife. It was like I was really speaking out there. And at that moment, you know, the baby came right out. There was like immediate help. You know, it's probably like not translating in words because it was something physically I could feel. That it was like, oh wow, the birth just, the baby was out in 20 seconds after that. And so yeah, I've employed that in daily life. I think it's something we can all do, and humans have done forever, but you know, I will use it for something as mundane as, gosh, I'm really late and kind of need some parking, and just ask for help. And I think there are these beings all around and like want to help.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's cool because I've actually never, I got the chills when you said asking them for help because that's not something I've done. I'm actually maybe that's something I'll try.
Yeah, just like try it for really kind of like I think we think, you know, it's like, whoa, we have to like tune in and like ask for something really big and get formal about it. I think they're just everywhere.
Yeah. No, I think yeah, totally. Yeah, like I said, I am going to give that a shot. And it's interesting. Again, it reminds me of Carissa a little bit because she has said to me, she's like, I see you in my meditations sometimes, and she'll reach out to me. But she says, she's like, she's like, if you need me, just sort of connect to me. And she's not meaning by email. She's saying, just I can hear you when you when you reach out to me and I see a thought or whatever. So yeah, no, I think it's
My guess is that in your work, with the amount that you do and your devotion to helping people in a really big way, that you would have even more of these beings all around you.
It's interesting, when I think about this, I don't know if there's if again, quantity or how that works. I don't have a good understanding of what I think about that. I do know it's interesting. Like I was saying, I see overlap in these different ways of seeing the world, again, or what we would call spirituality or religion. And it reminds me of, we haven't talked about psychedelics yet, but in the ayahuasca world and the healers that I really respect and can communicate with. And I'm going to say communicate with because, a lot of the ayahuasqueros are shipibos who are Peruvian, Spanish is even their second language. And I speak Spanish, meaning that, but when I communicate with them in Spanish, there's a distance because this is not their primary language. But I have a couple of friends and ayahuasca guides who spent a lot of time living in Peru, and they actually have talked about, I've shared this idea of spirit guides and archangels and that sort of thing, and they're like, yeah, there's absolutely, and they actually say there's one. We each have one main one that is with us. And again, I don't know if I completely agree with that yet. I just don't know. But they are like, oh no, yeah, that thing was here. It was visiting during the session. They don't always bring it up with people because it's like, for some people it would be too much for them. But they have shared with me that this happens. And especially my last set of ayahuasca experiences, I did have what was clear connections with other entities in non-physical form, where I've had hints of it before in previous, especially psychedelic experiences, but in this one, it was kind of a night and day also thing, like I was describing with Chris, like I was conversing with at least one entity during this ayahuasca experience. And so yeah, it's definitely something I think that, yeah, I'd like to connect with more. And just the last thing I'll say, and it's almost like, I don't know, we're talking about healers and healing, but you were talking about art and artistry your husband's a musician. That sounds like, and it reminds me of my girlfriend. She's a painter, and so it's like and I've learned in a way a lot about the arts and artistry through her, and it's almost like, there's a lot of what's called art, and I think there are certain artists that are more connected to this thing that we're referring to, and what I mean is, it's almost like the ones that are connected to this, to the greater thing that is happening, their artistry seems to be, there's a fluidity to it, and there's also a richness to it that seems to just come through. And I would say that the same thing is I can see in the healing realm, people that call themselves healers, whether it's psychiatrists or, like, there's some that are just, they're connected, meaning they're channeling this thing through their expression. So I would actually say, probably I would imagine in almost any field we're talking about, even in engineering, or that there's, I think of like Nikolai Tesla, not obviously Elon Musk company, but like he was someone who I think of in the science realm. Maybe he was someone who's very connected to these spirit guides, So it's almost like, I don't know, I'm hesitating saying healers or I am more connected to that. I think it's more
anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, anyone.
Like puts the art into it, that the healing arts, the musical arts, the, cooking. People are channeling there. And I think that is the art bit. It's that connection to something beyond. So before we dive into the psychedelic stuff, I just want to ground the conversation in, because we had a decent amount of questions come in around pharmaceutical drugs, around reasons that one might be taking a pharmaceutical drug. So I actually feel like that's the place to, let's just cover that ground, and we can really get your perspective there. And then I think that'll take us nicely into some of the psychedelic work. But what do you think about the root of, and you can separate them because you think they all have different roots, or maybe you think they all have one root. I'll let you run with it. But the ones that we had some questions were around are depression, anxiety, ADHD, anorexia, and suicidal thoughts. We had many questions, but I really, those five were the most commonly asked.
So there's this, and I like that you use the word anxiety and words anxiety and depression, because I think it reflects kind of the way I want to respond to your question. And there's a saying that I like to say, which is that, well, I'm going to actually give credit to I was going to say that I had thought about it in terms of anxiety, but then I was reading this book called Shantaram, which is nothing to do with medicine. It's a really great book if anyone wants to read it, which is under the title of fiction. But anyway, it's an interesting story. But in that book, I was having this thought around, you know, fear versus anxiety, which what I would call the emotion versus a state. And I'm going to say the same thing is between sadness and depression. I'm going to say those things are not the same. Mm-hmm. So in this book, the protagonist is talking, and he says, he's referring to someone, and he says, the only people who feel depressed are the ones that don't know how to feel sad. Mm. And I'm going to say the same as for anxiety. The only people who are feeling anxious are the ones that don't know how to feel fear. Meaning when we have started to disallow feeling or emotion and we block it, we get suffering. And that suffering can take many directions, right? So that suffering can become what we call anxiety or depression or OCD or an eating disorder or suicidality. Okay, so it's sort of how we are suffering from not feeling or expressing the emotion, or how we're expressing the containment of those emotions, which lead to these things that we call disease. Now, yeah, I'm just trying to think. Did that answer your question? I'm just sorry. There was could have gone on a tangent, but yeah, I mean, so that's that's sort of the basics of what I would. Sorry, but I feel there's part of your question I didn't answer. Apologies.
First of all, shout out to the author of Shantaram, who got the epic quotation from you, who has been through 15 years of medical school. So
yeah, no, precisely, yeah. I mean, we're all touching into the same thing.
Yeah. But so what I'm hearing is that the common root of all of these iterations that, you know, and with each year, I feel like we have got new names for disorders and diseases, but that the root cause of all of them is not feeling the bigger, more basic human emotion that's underneath it, suppressing that, and it splinters off into some kind of particular neuroses. Is that?
Yeah, and now I actually remember what I was going to say. So, which I was going to add something. It's not that I forgot to answer your question. So, kind of when you paused at saying feeling, not feeling, and then you threw a bunch of things after, you could have stopped at just not feeling. Mm-hmm. That's really the essence of it. What I was going to say before I remembered now is that, you know, when I work with clients, I work with 5 basic emotions. You know, I hammer these into people. They end up memorizing them pretty quick. But I think of anger, sadness, fear, joy, and arousal, like sexual arousal. Mm-hmm. And I distinguish those, what I would call emotions, from other things that we call emotions. which I'll explain a little bit right now. But because I know you have a child, or more than one child, and I don't know if, is that I don't have any children, but I have a niece and nephew. And when I mean those 5 basic emotions, is because I mean these are emotions that children feel, right? Like, and especially with, I remember when my niece was an infant, or even like a year old, she would flip back and forth between, especially like anger, joy, fear. Like she would be crying, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, what do I do?" And then she'd start laughing, and I'd be it did not make any sense to me. I'm what did I do? What didn't I do? But then we teach, right? We teach and culture children not to do certain things. This is the time to feel this or that, or they're observing it in us, right? They can sense, and when there's disconnect or even conflict with the parents, but the parents aren't saying it. And so then, the baby, which I often refer to with my patients, is like, that is, we're still feeling that stuff, or at some level. For many of us that are dissociated, we may not consciously feel it, but it's there. But we're essentially teaching children not to feel, right? And again, school does a number on us, parents do a number on us, all sorts of things. But we're learning to contain. And the reason I mentioned those 5 emotions is because I think those are emotions that can be felt without thought. There's a distinction here, because I think other things that we call emotion, like jealousy, are not really emotions, right? Jealousy requires thought. It's anger, but it requires a me, and then there's this other 2 people, and so meaning we're adding a complexity to the emotion. But the reason why when I'm working with people, I really relate it back to emotions, is because that's the thing that's being held and needs to be cleared. And when we can free ourselves and finally almost complete the feeling of it, is when we see what's mostly been under the bucket of mental illness drop away. But we're also, I'm certainly not the only one that believes this anymore. And there's lots of people that have written about it, especially Gabor Mate more recently, the mind-body connection, where I think actually holding this emotional energy is actually causing what we are calling physical illness at this point. Also, it impacts autoimmune illness and cancer, that sort of thing too.
Yeah. So would you say then that psychedelics, and we'll get into their various forms, but in essence, are these psychedelics pulling someone into that suppressed core emotion and forcing them down into it to have the experience? And then that's where the resolution comes, whether it's physical or mental, or we can talk about all the great things that occur resolved after it, but in essence, is that what's happening?
Well, I'm actually saying, yes, there are great things that happen with these, as you ended, but there's also bad things that happen. Meaning, and I'll get to why that is when just in my explanation right now, which is they're certainly not silver bullets. And my favorite definition of psychedelics comes from Stan Grof, who's really the kind of one of the godfathers, I would say, or he was really the first psychedelic psychiatrist. So he's still alive, but he's quite far along in age, and he's quite ill these days. But he calls psychedelics non-specific amplifiers of the unconscious. And I think that is the simplest and best definition you'll find of them, right? People talk about, the 5-HT2A receptor, like people, they're getting lost in again, the neuroscience, where they're simply things that we can ingest, and they open up the unconscious. It could be unconscious feelings, it could be unconscious thoughts, it could be unconscious memories, just stuff that we are not aware of. And so the different psychedelics do it differently. MDMA opens different parts than psilocybin, opens up different things in DMT or ayahuasca. So they just open up, and we can have an experience. But having the experience doesn't mean that it will complete and it will be resolved of it. Sometimes, ideally, that happens, but not always, right? We could resist it just like we did the first time around, or the many, many times around, and push it back down. we could actually, that's when people talk about the word surrender. We could actually not resist or not surrender, and we actually don't tuck it back down. It actually stays open. Now it's there and aware, but it actually hasn't been moved, and that's when you can feel worse after, because this thing that you had pushed down because it was painful rose for the opportunity to feel it. But if for one reason or another you weren't able to fully feel it, that can stay more intensely in the present time. And I'm going to say, or, it came up and you need help. I mean, this is like, right, all this happened to us when we were kids, or a lot of it actually. And then certainly there's traumatic things that happen as we're adults. But that's where the guide or the therapist comes in. Can they help us through this, right? And especially these days, I think there's, a few years ago, it was pretty hard to find a psychedelic guide. Now, like, people are openly advertising on Instagram that they're psychedelic guides, but you have people that don't understand these things that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Some who do, there's some unlicensed, untrained people who do majestic work. I mean, really my most trusted, in my most trusted sort of small number of people that I have for guides for me, half of them don't have any degrees or licenses. So it doesn't require those. But meaning the thing that's common between all those people is they've kind of walked through the fire, and they've done this, and they've done it right sometimes, and they've felt worse sometimes, right? And so it's really about how do does the guide know how to navigate something when it's coming up for someone? If it's in the mind realm, do I have experience to help them there? How to unclutter the thinking? If it's a body thing, if the sensation's coming up, if it's coming up as feeling and not as anything that's can be verbalized, can I help someone through that? Can I identify that as the guide? If it's in the spiritual realm, if there's something about the bigness of reality and spirit and my being a human that comes up, can I converse with someone with that? So it's these things can open anything up in the realm of mind, body, spirit. It's simply an opportunity to revisit or to explore something, but it doesn't mean that it will go towards the completion of it. The only one that I would say that of those medicines that has a very built-in kind of guide or buddy that is not the person is MDMA. Like, there is a heart-centeredness kind of guide with MDMA that does seem to help us guide ourselves almost. But then you have other psychedelics, which I would say probably ketamine is the one that I would say is most concerning to me right now, just because of its mass availability, that actually does not have that heart-centered guidedness to it. It sort of opens up, and it can sometimes lead to very confusing, dark experiences as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, if we could walk through each one. So if all of these psychedelics are taking you on a journey to amplify whatever is in your unconscious, if we think of them as like planes, trains, automobiles, boats, different vehicles to ride on, how would you categorize them? And I guess them would be psilocybin, DMT, MDMA, ketamine, LSD. Do you want to add anything to that list?
I mean, no, there's many, many more, but yeah, you hit the major ones. So I have this way of thinking about them, sort of in a cross, and it's just, it was interesting that this image came to me as because I actually became very anti-religion because I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and I identified as an atheist for much of my adult life. So this return to kind of spirituality has been an interesting one. But anyway, so this cross is the way I sort of think about how do I think about the different medicines in terms of how they can be used as tools. And on the horizontal, I sort of think about our experience as a human, right? And I'm going to say, maybe I'll preface this by saying, I don't know what your spiritual beliefs are, or people listening are going to have different ones, but my kind of short version for me is I feel like we come from something that, the thing that we refer to as, oneness or unity or God or spirit. But there's like a singularity to it. There's like this, oh, this thing that is all that is, this connectedness. And I feel like that's the place we come from, and I feel like that's the place we will go to after death. And I would say that the human experience is about experiencing that separation. And I would say, and then finding our reconnection to all that. And I think it is, as we do that as humans, I think is when we really are, what I would say is we are in awe or in wonder. And to me, that's like the goal of healing now. It used to be happy, but not to me. Awe and wonder, I think, encompass what I seek most in life now. But that awe and wonder sometimes includes fear, it includes terror, it includes, it's just there's a vastness to this. And so when I think of this cross, I sort of think about, so the human part of us that is here and in relationship to each other, is that I would say that's where most of our current suffering comes from. In the Western world, I'm going to very specifically say it's in our relationships. It's our mother, our father, our boyfriend, girlfriend. This person did this to me, or this person or group of people is keeping me from doing this, or this thing, whether it's money or that, is stopping me. It's our relationships. So where I think about the horizontal healing, so healing of relationships, of human relationships, I think of MDMA to me is sort of king there. And I would say what I mean by that is, 90+% of the time, the experience one has on MDMA is very grounded to the human experience, to birth until now. Rarely does it get transpersonal, meaning, sometimes it does, but, my MDMA experiences and the people I work with are usually, childhood memories, current difficult experiences, past traumas, and working through those. Sometimes people have, and I've had experiences with what we were maybe referring to as seeing some of these spirit guides or other realms. I've heard some people, on occasion will perhaps say they talk to an ancestor on MDMA, but it's rare. It's very, very rare. So I would say that's a horizontal type focus is the human relationships. And on the vertical, then I would say is kind of our relationship to that greater thing, that oneness, that unity, that spirit, which I would say on the extremes, the medicines that get us there, the compounds, the plants, I would say are most exemplified by the DMTs. So 5-MeO DMT, which people call it the toad or toad venom, or NN-DMT, which they're kind of cousins. They're different. And when you smoke those, you have this deep connection to what people call God, singularity, oneness, etc. The reality is that all of the compounds have some of each, meaning sometimes with DMT, I'm coming back from a deep experience, and then I am thinking about how this applies to my relationships with other people. But I would say with DMT at any of the high doses or normal doses even, are going to focus on this vertical. It's a connection to this thing. And so in general, when I'm working with someone, I sort of think about where is their suffering coming from. For instance, I was just talking to someone today where it's like, oh, I'm struggling right now with what's my purpose, what I want my next stage of life is. I made a bunch of money, but I don't want to keep doing this and focusing my life here. I want to figure out what to do next. That I think of, okay, we're going to probably go more towards the vertical stuff like psilocybin, etc., maybe ayahuasca, versus someone who's really struggling in their relationships. Like, oh, I feel very lonely, or I have a lot of conflict, and that sort of stuff, where I think of MDMA. And so that's a non-short version of how I think about these. But I'd say, again, most people who are really struggling these days, kind of, I would say the most helpful or safe way to go is with this MDMA. It's just, there's a gentleness to it. There's a relationship thing. And I think when we really are connected to ourselves and each other, I think that spirituality, that vertical comes naturally almost. I don't think it's necessary, but I don't think it happens so easily the other way around.
Yeah. And so with those more vertical elements, how do you think about psilocybin, LSD, DMT? How are those different for you?
In many different ways. I'm also looking at the clock. I'm okay to go a little bit longer if you can. I just don't know what your schedule's like. We just
Oh yeah, I will take as much of you as I can. So
let me just look at my calendar. Yes, I can. Oh no, we said an hour and a half. Perfect. Okay, I was off.
thank you.
It's a really interesting question. So I mean, first I think of, especially when you mention LSD, I think of synthetics versus meaning the psychedelics that were made in a laboratory. The main ones I think about are LSD, MDMA, and ketamine. And then versus I think of the ones that are plant-based. And it's interesting because this is something certainly on the border of what I'm still sort of exploring and discovering myself, where I would say all of the plant-based ones, including the other main one that it would be the mescaline compounds, like the either wachuma or peyote, all of them have either I've experienced myself or worked with, or because peyote, for instance, I've never taken, but I've heard from people who have that all of these, if you provide an opportunity to connect to the plant spirit, and that when people used to talk about plant spirits, that was like pretty, I was like, oh, like I don't know what people are really talking, like I've never had that experience until this last time I went to Peru. I think it was last October, where like that, when I say there was a clear conversation between me and this other entity, it was the plant spirit of ayahuasca. And some people describe that from day one. I did ayahuasca for the first time, I think in 2017, and I think I've had probably 40 ceremonies at this point, but I didn't get there until this last set, meaning for whatever reason. But so the plant-based ones all seem to have a real spirit, a real conscious entity that is associated with that plant. And I actually think it is a different one for ayahuasca than with the cactus compounds and with mushrooms. But they all have an intelligence to them that you can sort of, again, there's an opportunity to engage with it, verbally or non-verbally. We can talk more about that after if you want to go there. And I'd say the synthetic ones don't really have that. There certainly can be again a connection to something greater, but it seems to be much more. Yeah, and again, this is something I'm currently exploring. So I mean, my answer may not be very eloquent around this, but it does not seem to have that same connection to nature, Mother Earth, plant spirits, and that sort of thing. Certainly, it opens up to many profound things, but it doesn't seem to have that aspect to it. So
is it intuitive? With the ones that have a plant spirit, are you just sort of letting it come to you? Who needs what, or when you need what, or?
So now you're saying as I choose to work with it myself or with people, you're saying, or?
Yeah, I mean, either way, in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something again that we're very much exploring. I think, and I'm meaning like I think the people who I really think of as like kind of the real deal like healers or mediums, and I know we use that word mediums. I think that the people who I've just seen a level of healer who is working with that spirit and that entity, like it is a like coworker, very much. And so I've just seen that relationship and experienced it now enough to know that it's a real thing. And so yeah, so and whether we call it intuition or mediumship or whatever, I don't know. It's just we're trying to put a word on something that this experience is. So yeah, definitely I see that more with the plant spirit or plant medicines, and but that's not to say that I don't know. Again, we're figuring this out. They're trying to make sense of it as we go. Could it be that certain doses, some of the synthetic ones, you could do that maybe. And the other thing is that there's overlap between them. Like LSD is certainly synthetic, but it's from an ergot derivative, meaning that the molecule where it's rooted from actually is an ergot, which comes from fungus. So there is this molecular overlap between some of the synthetics and some of the pure plant medicines. So again, I haven't seen anything where anyone really has put forth like a real understanding of this. But if you think of them as sort of locks and keys, perhaps the molecular structure of the plant-based ones allows us to open up a part of that non-specific amplifier of the unconscious that opens up to entities, and maybe the synthetic ones simply don't, because where it's the wrong lock and key. Who knows? It's interesting. I've actually never thought about the question.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is that's interesting, for instance, like is all the psychedelics that I know of, minus one being ketamine, which is why it's interesting, because I think ketamine I've had a lot of dark experiences with ketamine. Ketamine is the only synthetic, certainly out of the main ones, and maybe out of all of them, that does not have a natural derivative, meaning LSD is related to fungus compounds. MDMA, there's a plant called sassafras, but there's other plants that it is related to, even though it's mostly made in a lab. Ketamine, we have found no natural analog of ketamine, which is just, it gives me the chills actually when I think about it, because it's something that clearly has a powerful effect on us. There's a receptor in the body for it, but we don't find it in nature. So it's just this
AI.
Well, actually, it's just is an interesting thing to it. And I don't like working with it. I used to work with it quite a bit. I don't anymore. There's just something where to me it does not feel, there's something to it. That's
yeah. Yeah, the plant spirit thing, I mean, I think is very real. There are certain plants, non-psychedelic, there are certain plants, like shatavari, Shisandra, I don't know, there are like these plants that have been around that really come out and talk and have energy the same way you can pass a person in the street and just get a lot off of them. Absolutely. Interesting. So ayahuasca, like so much energy, I mean, like very present, almost very conversational. With me, I have not been called to have a psychedelic, like a full-blown psychedelic experience with that energy. At this point, it's just been like, oh, wow, I can see you. You're powerful. I see what you're doing for others. It doesn't feel like it's for me. People will talk to me about their experiences. And when they're just talking about it, it's like that energy comes into the room and starts to affect me to the point where it's like, I can physically start to feel like what it feels like in the body. And I had a situation some years ago where I accidentally drank some ayahuasca. How does one accidentally ayahuasca? Move to California, you'll find out. I accidentally drank some. I did not know that I had accidentally drank some. It was then confirmed that yes, in fact, I had. And I started to feel the effects in my body and then my mind. And I went outside and I just got on the grass and I got really quiet and I was able to have a conversation with the plant. I don't know how else to say it other than I conversated with the plant and said, I really don't want to do this. Can you let me off the hook? And in an instant, I was totally fine. And so had gone from drinking a considerable amount, feeling the effects, asking for mercy. And I don't know, it was really cool. It was totally fine.
Yeah, and I think I actually know how one can accidentally drink ayahuasca. I'm assuming you were knowing, or you were perhaps knowing that you were going to take something mind altering, but perhaps it included. Or okay,
No, No, was in no.
We may or may not get to that. No, I mean, what I'm talking about is there's more and more people mixing psychedelics, which I think, and some people don't tell. In certain schools within psychedelic, teachers are like, don't tell the person what they take, and I think that's a bad. Just to anyone listening, I think that's bad news. There's a lot of people who do that. Just not mixing in general, but not telling people what they're taking. There's just a certain community of the slice of the underground therapy world that does that. And I see no reason why you shouldn't be telling someone what they're taking.
I've heard of a guy that does that, where
Yeah.
it's a mystery thing and he alchemizes to you, and there's like 13 different things in it. Yeah.
I don't buy that. But anyway, to go back to your kind of experiences, that I do think, that there's this beautiful conversation that can happen. And I would say certain spirits, an entity will have that conversation and will respond to you just like that. And meaning they do in a way honor, respect. But as we were talking about these sort of different realms and entities and beings, there's actually, I was initially shocked and also scared to find out, but it made sense after when I thought about it. Just like there are people out there who we can engage with in this human experience that have good intentions for us, but there's also ones that have bad intentions, or who are selfishly engaging with us or want to take something from us, whether it's energy or anything. And it's become clear as day to me that in that spirit realm, I think it's beautiful. We talk about, there's helpers and healers and doctors that are, trying to help us along our journey in the spirit realm. There's the complete balancing of that also. I mean, meaning there are dark energies, there are dark entities, there are maybe misguides that exist as well. And I think that's why there is an art to this, that again, it's what concerns me a little bit about how quickly psychedelic use has expanded, especially with the more like vertical, powerful ones like the DMTs and ayahuasca, being guided with people who don't know how to really navigate that realm, because we can take things on from other people, like meaning if we're doing a group psilocybin experience or group ayahuasca, there is movement that can happen between people. There's also things that can come in from the environment, and not to go too far into like the psychedelic spiritual Star Wars, but there are some people that are capable, I would say, like in maybe certainly in the ayahuasca world, that are capable of knowing when there's another group that they don't like going through something, and can impact their energy and send in things that impact, again, maybe just say that would impact people there. The very skilled guides of ayahuasca know how to almost put up, they've described to me like force fields during the thing so that doesn't happen. But most people out there working with this stuff, are not even aware of it, meaning people who are supposedly guiding others through it, are not even aware of this, let alone know how to keep things out or keep things from between people. And so it's just, I'm glad we're actually talking. This is interesting that we're talking about most of the things we've talked about today. I've never talked about actually during an interview. So, but yeah, this is very, very real stuff. And so I think, maybe your, hesitancy or a feeling that it's for now not something you want to engage in comes from, some of what we're talking about.
Yeah, possibly. I think I also, so I started having, and we'll get into microdosing because people have so many questions there, but I started macrodosing psychedelics at a very, very young age, naively, and on my own. I think I was in 6th grade. And my first experience was, and because I was a child, I was like, oh, LSD. Yeah, I learned about it in music.
I just want to say, you certainly win the award for the youngest person I know that's taken a psychedelic. Really, like that. I've never heard 6th grade.
Cool. I think that it actually really shaped me, and so I'm grateful for it. I wouldn't want to do it again. It's not something I want for my children, but it happened, and like I think it's been all right. yeah. So, you know, I like was a child and in school and in music class and learned about Jimi Hendrix. And so the teacher just thought it would be like a cool thing to tell us that Jimi Hendrix wore a bandana on his forehead and put tabs of acid in there. And it
Oh,
was like, what's LSD? What does that do? And so then she explained, you know, it makes you like see colors. And I thought,
uh,
that sounds great. Music and colors. And so I went to a school in Manhattan, and there was a student in a grade older than me, and his parents were doctors at NYU, and they were experimenting with things. And so at a very young age, I got my hands on LSD from a lab at NYU, or you know, maybe the lab wasn't in NYU, but they were sourcing in pure MDMA.
mm,
That was
mhm.
like sixth and seventh grade, maybe eighth grade. So I had these big macro experiences and informed a lot. And since then, it's like I think there's something too when you've been to those places, you kind of keep them inside of you. And so my adult life has just been meditation, kind of doing like non-organized work on trauma. Can't say that there's like a real method there, but there's something about what do you think about that? It's like loading in these macro experiences and then perhaps keeping them that you've always got a bit of a line out and you don't necessarily need to keep taking the substances.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I would say. Well, I think that's a fine way to approach it, and I think that meaning, you know, we were talking about mind, body, spirit, and you know that this spiritual bypassing sort of concept, where I think that some people, and this was me at times, got lost in the psychedelic experience itself. You know, thought it was the real thing, or that realm is more important or more divine or sacred than here. And I don't believe that to be the case at all. Um, but there was certainly a time where I was indulging in those experiences I had, the realms I would go to, but then I would come back here and still feel like I was suffering, you know. And so I think that I sort of, you know, and as sort of going back to one of the first things we talked about today, that sort of, I would actually say, you know, meaning childhood experiences lead us to shut down emotions. What we didn't talk about is like, I think actually we have a lot more connection to those realms we're talking about getting into with psychedelics naturally as children. But I think that is also cultured into not feeling those things. And there's certain cultures in Latin America, other places that actually maintain a connection with that culturally, and connecting to spirits is much more common than in our um, Western culture. And so I think that, you know, in a culture where we've shut down those connections, to reopen them and then kind of maintain that connection is totally possible. We don't need the psychedelics kind of is just opening up the channel, and we don't need it. So certainly I think, like, yeah, wanting or desiring to go back in it is totally fine. You know, I think it's, in a way, again, the point is to use the experience how we want it to impact our life now. I would say the only hesitancy on that for me is like, say people who, I don't know, for me, I imagine this is going to continue to be something I do, or exploring different doses, different molecules. But I think, you know, that's for me, as if I continue to do the work I do, which I think for now I'm going to continue to do healing work, is that to me it's like that is part of the education for me, but it's also part of the fun. And to me it's like I will continue to do it because I think I continue to really like learn and enjoy it. But there's certainly been a shift significantly towards how often I would use them, or what doses I would use them at, how I would use them, you know,
Yeah.
compared to when I started this 10 years ago to now. So meaning I also think that continuing to take them okay too. I just think most of what is being talked about with psychedelics these days is healing. And so I think, I think making sure that we're applying it to, and there's a reason why we're feeling we're doing it, I think is important to not get lost in them.
Yeah. So microdosing. I think we all commonly talk about microdosing for psilocybin. Do you think it would be beneficial to microdose anything else? Specifically, people are asking about ayahuasca. I think I've heard people talking about that. Is that like, can you microdose MDMA?
So yeah, I mean, microdosing, I think, is a term that it's just interesting how it's evolved. And so, like, I'm going to go back to Stan Grof's definition again. So, non-specific amplifiers of the unconscious. So, again, so it's how we're opening it, meaning which molecule, and how much we're opening. So whether we call it macrodosing, it doesn't really matter. It's just more like, do we understand this concept that I'm taking something to open up, and how much do I want to open up? Why am I opening up? So would sort of be the way I think of microdosing. Like sometimes I microdose when I go see my therapist because there's something that is like stuck and I would like to move it. I don't think I can get there on my own. I've been trying it. And microdosing before I go to therapy helps me get in touch with the emotions. I think that's actually a very underused like method is because it stays relational. I'm working with another human. I'm not having an eye mask and blasting off somewhere else. I'm actually being very much connected to my body, my emotions, another person in the room. And so, or we can microdose. Sometimes I know people at microdosing, they go jogging. It helps them get in their body more and move. And I just feel like I feel it's important to just be doing it and knowing why we're doing it. What I disagree, or again, personally, I just don't think it's as helpful is, and I think this reflects the business capitalist aspect of coming into psychedelics, where there's a desire to make a protocol, and that you take this every few days, and that it's going to do this, like that there's just, again, it's just not honoring. People are in a different place. It's going to open different things. It's just there isn't really a method to it. So if one is doing it for healing, it's am I going to take something, whether it's a small amount or a large amount, to purge, to catharsis, to move something, or am I taking this for fun? And taking it for fun is a totally valid reason to be taking a psychedelic. I mean, to open up and to be able to connect more, it's totally valid. Let's just be clear on what we're doing here, and what the people are, the setting that we're surrounding ourselves with. Now, just to address your last thing, I'm glad you actually said MDMA. So MDMA, I would say, is the only one that is non-microdosable, meaning there does seem to be a threshold at which one has to take it to get the heart opening, warmth, safety effects. And this is simply like a pharmacology thing now, because and MAPS saw this, meaning the nonprofit MAPS, which has done all the MDMA research, that at lower doses, this is early on in their research when they were testing what doses to use, that some people's PTSD got worse with low amounts of MDMA. And it's thought either that they didn't have enough of that help, the heart openness, but the root of MDMA is an amphetamine, right? In the end, so it has this amphetamine-like quality, right? Like cocaine, Adderall, that can be a stimulant. And so if you don't hit a certain threshold, and it's unclear what that is, but I would say somewhere around under 80, maybe 60 is where you mostly get this like amphetamine drive that does not come with the gentleness of it. So I wouldn't, that's the only of the psychedelics that I can think of right off the bat that I would say it may actually be a bad idea to microdose that.
And so I hear you on the ritualizing of a microdose, and I think that's like a fair amount of the questions are people wanting, like, give me a ritual, tell me how long I should be doing it, what is the dose? And so I think there's like this general thing in the wellness world around microdosing, make it programmatic. And
Yeah.
there's sort of this like one size fits all thing to it. And what I'm hearing you say is to really approach it, I don't know, as I would argue you approach anything, as an individual, thinking about why you're doing it, feeling what it feels like, what it actually does for you. Can I just ask, is there, like, do you have a definition for a microdose? I've heard people give this definition, or maybe not a definition, but what the experience of a microdose should be, and it should be imperceptible.
Yeah, so the classic, like if we follow the where the origin of that word came from within the psychedelic world, it is supposed to be not perceptible. So most of what people are talking about these days with microdosing is perceptible. It's just lowly perceptible. So I'm glad you actually, yeah, that most people don't know what you just said, is that, yeah, it's supposed to be sub-perceptible. So that's why for me it's, the word is not so useful. It's just, how much am I taking? What am I trying to do? Because one person's sub-perceptible can be another person's very significant experience. Like people do have
Yeah.
different thresholds to open up to these different realms, and people have different thresholds on different days, or depending how, I have found myself that the more, again, what we're calling healing transformation work I've done, I require less to get to where I used to go. And maybe to add to that, I'll say that, I think that even thinking about this definition of non-specific amplifier of the unconscious, right? It goes further than what we're throwing under the category of psychedelics. Like an easy one, more obvious would be marijuana, right? We don't think of marijuana as psychedelic, but it is powerfully psychedelic. Like it, in many cultures have used it ceremonially, but now we can go down Abbot Kinney in Venice and buy it at MedMen. So it's losing in a way it's part of its powerful abilities. Caffeine is another one, right? Incredibly, it amplifies unconscious things. So does tobacco, but there's many things that we're not calling that. So I would actually even say sugar. I mean, anything we're ingesting that impacts our experience, our feelings, is all in this realm of just opening. And I don't, like, some people say, oh, like caffeine or tobacco psychedelic. I don't like the word. It's just like, it's, these things are impacting our sensory system, our experience. And so, yeah, and the thing, going back to the piece about, people desiring, a protocol, and it's understandable, is what I would say. There's a lot of people seeking, there's a lot of pain in the world right now, there's a lot of suffering, and there's a desire to heal, and I can understand this wanting a protocol and that sort of thing. And some of them, again, people have found that they're helpful. But the thing that we're not seeing on social media, where I tell people, is I get the stories, I get the emails from things gone wrong, whether it's microdosing or macrodosing, right? But people aren't posting on their, TikTok or Instagram, yeah, I, took psilocybin over the weekend and I feel really shitty and suicidal now, right? So there is this, the way, yeah, it's just the way, yeah, marketing, especially, I guess, has impacted all, of our human experiences. The same thing has now happened to psychedelics, and so it's just. But the difference is that these are very powerful things that do impact our mental health and our consciousness in a very real way. And I think that's the piece that's concerning. And it's also, it's a challenging time because it's the way I've learned the healing work I do is through apprenticeship. And I think that's happened, pre-psychiatry. I mean, healing has been a sort of an apprentice model, right? In other cultures, in the indigenous, it's you put in the time, the energy, the experience to do it. And I think that's what we're not seeing, is that, and I think a lot of healers themselves, I think it's good. We need more people that are going to train as psychedelic guides, but we don't really have the elders and the mentors. And I think that's not something that is I haven't even heard that talked about very much right now, but it's, Rick Doblin, who started MAPS, has said that he estimates it'll be about the year 2070 where he feels society will have learned how to incorporate psychedelics. And I think a lot of this is the training of really experienced people. And so, I mean, I say that, and it's a scary number.
Training, Will.
What's that?
You're an elder in training. Thank you.
Yeah, no. I definitely, that's a focus. When I said in the beginning that I want to, what's my life going to look like? I actually do think it's a lot more training and educating and that sort of thing. It's just, but there, when he threw out that number, because Rick, I think is really the person that's most, responsible for bringing psychedelics to where they are. I mean, with his age, he knows he's not going to be alive at that time, right? But yet he has all this knowledge of seeing how things have evolved over the last few decades. And so I think I like just the ethos of what he says. It's, this is going to take time. And so it's hard because that doesn't give people good answers, because there's a lot of people asking and emailing saying, I want help. And it's not available right now widely. It's really just, I can't even fill one hand with the number of people I would say are just like, actually, no, I can't fill two hands with just rock solid psychedelic healers. Like there just isn't many that I know of out there.
So I just want to take it back to microdosing. I just have a few specific questions in there that I think might help people that are like, it's a thing and I've heard of it and I kind of want to check it out and dabble. So when I see people, again, this was many years ago, but it was like microdosing, interesting, I want to check it out.
Yeah.
And so you are, classically, it's meant to be imperceptible. And so to me, I think that it's important that if you want to go on that route, like a true imperceptible microdose, and you can tell us why somebody would want to do that, what's happening in the brain, but that you find your own dose. Because I'm seeing people now, there's this assumption of like a microdose is jamming ground up mushrooms into a standard like OO capsule. And for me, I look at that and it's like, whoa, if I were to take that, I would not be driving a car. That would not be a microdose. Like for me, I actually can't find a microdose at this point. It's turned into like I could dip a moistened pinky to ground up mushrooms and I put a little on the tip of the tongue. And at that level, it's like, this is totally perceptible. And I cannot be on a computer. I cannot be around whining children. Like any amount is like, I need to just lay down in the grass and have my own time and space. So just throwing that out there, because I don't know how like that many people are just cranking it out with like the cat mushrooms, and then they're on Zoom, and then they're like, I don't know, riding the subway. Like,
yeah. And I think, the thing is, this is, I mean, again, I think it represents a desire, for people, I don't know. I think there's this, either it can be, in the case, a conscious or unconscious feeling that one is not experience or living the life that one wants to live, right? Meaning that there's something more. And I think that people are very hungry right now, and and for good reasons, that I think we've shut off a lot of what is possible in the human experience. And so people are desiring, and that's why I think that's why we're seeing all these different approaches, and day versus all these things is people's attempts to really want to experience things differently or understand themselves or the world differently. And I think that for me, the quick, if I would say the way I would advise people, that is, actually, no, I should be careful about that. This is not advising. I'm a medical doctor with a license, so this is not this is not medical advice. We are not anyone's doctor. But one approach I've taken myself, or with some people I do that are direct clients with me, is that I think the key to healing is this purging, is the catharsis of old energy, emotion. And if you combine microdosing with sort of anything that already helps you do that, but say may not help you every time. Like I know someone who, and many people now that do yoga, right? But most people are mostly doing it for exercise to have their body look different. I kind of think of it as sort of, but where in India, it's been this one of many paths to this expansion, enlightenment. I don't love that word, but you know what I mean. Yoga was a practice towards the connection. And now it's become, you can buy a 10 class pack and for $99 and go get your coffee with it. But meaning like we it's only a tool, meaning we can perturb any tool to where it doesn't do the thing we're wanting it to do. But I know some people that microdose and will go to yoga, and that helps them connect, that helps them cry, that helps them connect to memories, the body memories as they're moving in different positions. As I mentioned earlier, I've gone to my therapist, or some of my clients choose by their own decision to come in and while microdosing. But if some people meditate and microdose, so I'm just saying, like, if there's anything that you already can, and I think exercise. So if there's anything that you already feel is something that helps you transform, heal, or that you feel is on the cusp of it, and you can add a little bit, it could be a way of yeah, versus just saying I'm going to do this and go about my normal day and go to work and all. It's just there's a bit more intention around it if it's
so when you do your personal microdose of psilocybin,
when I go see my therapist, when I have done microdosing, it has either been, so it mostly has been psilocybin, or many of the times, but I actually like microdosing wachuma or San Pedro cactus. That we can go down a rabbit hole of why I really like that one, but that's the one I prefer. It's harder to find that just out.
So, and you're finding your dose to take you, are you doing different doses depending on what it is you're trying to unlock, where you feel like you want to go for the day? Do you find your place where you're like, okay, well, at this dose, I can walk, I can talk, I can be fully relational? Like,
yeah. This is where I want to emphasize it. Yes. And then a week later, I'll take the exact same microdose and I'll be like, oh shit. Like, I mean, once I was driving and I'm like, I should not be driving. And I like pulled over. So meaning like for some reason that day, and I think now thinking back, I remember why, because I was at this museum there's these beautiful, very large scale pieces that I was looking at. This is just before I moved to New York from LA, where I was like, holy shit. But I think I was already open because of the energy. I mean, I think I was moving to New York in a week. And so there was all this like, energy and emotion coming through me. And I was just in awe of these pieces. And then as I left the museum, the microdose started to hit. And I'm like, oh my God. But I had been taking that exact amount, which was around 10% of a normal dose of San Pedro cactus. And I was just like, kind of like, I was like, oh, like, holy shit, I'm opening up into something else here. So yeah, so it's, I think always, it's changeable. Again, person to person, day to day, week to week. So
it's not one size fits all. It's kind of
even within a person, it's not always going to be one size fits all for you.
So I want to also cover, and looking at our time, are you okay to cover?
I can do another about 5, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. So, the other thing I want to cover is what you kind of started to get into is we hear all these glory stories, or like now, it's like part of like your wellness routine is to do all these things. Who is not a candidate for microdosing, macrodosing? People are asking questions about they've got schizophrenia in their family, or they're on SSRIs, or we even had a question around somebody who's used MDMA for years as a party drug.
Yep.
Should they not be using it therapeutically? Like,
so again, to answer your question directly, because you may have caught on that I go on tangents. So I would say that in the perfect world, which we're not in right now, meaning medical, legal, all this stuff, I don't know if anyone is not a candidate for it, regardless of what has happened. In many cultures, and I'm talking especially in the Shipibo, actually not, I don't know if it's Shipibo, in the Amazonian ayahuasca world. Again, yeah, I don't know if it's the Shipibos, but in the Shipibos, just for those who don't know, are the main, like pretty much most people serving ayahuasca in America, or if you go to a retreat, are Shipibos from a specific community of Peruvian healers. But there are certain communities with and without psychedelic medicines, and mostly indigenous, where when someone has what Western medicine would call a pathological bad psychotic break, they actually are like, we have identified someone who is going to become the shaman or the healer. Like, what a gift. Let's nurture that person. They are touching into other realms, right? Where Western medicine would say, sorry, family, your son or daughter's screwed for life. They have this thing. They have to be on these medications. There's a big problem, right? And then we're kind of going back to the Freud Jung thing. Like, so meaning in a perfect world, I actually think there's room for everyone to explore this stuff. Mm-hmm. Western medicine hat in me would have to say, okay, well, if someone has schizophrenia or if they are experiencing suicidality, you don't do that. But the problem is then, sometimes suicidality, and I've experienced suicide many times in my life, suicidal thoughts, even last year, I had numerous ones. But I used to be actually very ashamed of sharing that. But I've now seen it as such a beautiful tool. Now I've seen that when I have suicidal thoughts, it's actually this part of me pointing me actually towards an issue that is very powerfully wanting to come off, but there's also a resistance to it. So I've seen it as a gift. I mean, I'm profoundly like, it's just, there's this book called Suicide and the Soul by James Hillman, who few people have heard of. But the book's certainly not for everyone, but he really dives into suicidality in a way that's just magical. And the reason I bring up that book is because it's like that. It's again, a lot of what I would say is okay or not is cultural in terms of who takes it. And I do actually know, and I've had interest for some while or thoughts around, it'd be cool if we actually did an MDMA, especially research study on what we call first break psychosis, the first time someone has a psychotic episode, or in people who have full-blown schizophrenia. Actually, I have a colleague now that they're actually in the works to do this sort of study here in New York, actually. So I'm glad that someone's doing that. It's actually coming much sooner than I thought it was. I thought it would be 5 or 10 years from now before we even talked about that. So it's being studied. But so from a simply like psychiatric diagnosis, that would be like the bucket of what has been the most, oh no, you cannot give somebody a psychedelic who has schizophrenia or a family history of it. Again, Will, the human in me, says, no, this is, it would be important to explore, but me, Will, the doctor, again, is like culturally, medically, legally, we're not ready for that yet. Now, the other end of the spectrum, you mentioned medications. So the major issues with medications is, do they block what we're trying to do, right? So I would say that, as we were talking about the terms anxiety or depression earlier, or what we would call fear and sadness, is that if we're taking something to non-specifically amplify or open, and it's being countered by another thing that we're taking to suppress it, mainly antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications, benzodiazepines, if we're drinking alcohol, like we're just adding two energies. Like it's a conflicting thing, is the way I think about it. Is one way to think about medications, is like, so I try to balance that when working with people. Okay, so where are we? And I generally, I've never worked with anyone who's on an antidepressant. I would say that's just, we're still needing the antidepressant. Let's work on that. Why we're needing that first. Let's try to clear that first. Then there's back to the neurochemical things. And it's just hitting me actually, like, maybe this is why it is good that I'm a doctor. No, because like there is this aspect of guiding people that actually, like, yeah, there is the medical knowledge part that just struck me, where like there are certain things, especially SSRIs, that will actually, you just block it. Like pharmacologically, you just cannot have the psychedelic experience, or it is very suppressed by the medication you're taking. And that's SSRIs or antidepressants are the major culprit there. It just gets in the way, or it numbs it just suppresses it. There's a third category of like potential like danger, or is there anything you can take that is dangerous along with it? The major thing that's talked about is serotonin syndrome, which actually people would say, okay, so if you take MDMA, you should never be on a antidepressant because you can cause this thing called serotonin syndrome. Last I checked, and I haven't been super up on the literature, scientific literature, but I actually would be surprised if this has changed. There has actually never been a case of MDMA causing serotonin syndrome. So it's a hypothesized thing based on how people think it's worked, but it's never actually been, there's never been a case reported that I have seen that shows serotonin syndrome from psychedelic use. So
Now, I'm mindful of time and I know you have to go. Um,
a little more.
Can I meet you again one day soon? And because, you know, I really, really wanted to get your thoughts on SSRIs, benzos, long-term effects on the brain, why we're taking them, how to get off of them, withdrawal, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll tune in with you again. But if you have any just like quick parting thoughts on somebody who would like to get off of these drugs and have been on them for years, whether it's, I mean, it seems like it's mostly SSRIs.
Yeah, I think, so there is now really meaningful evidence, scientific evidence, that the impact of SSRIs stay after discontinuing them. And there's a study done by a colleague, Julie Holland of mine, who has been in the psychedelic space for quite some time, actually. She was one of the first, certainly. I think of her as one of the grandmothers, or maybe she'd prefer if I say the aunts of the field. She actually published a study relatively recently in the last year or two that actually showed, because MAPS in general has said people have to be off SSRIs, I think 4 weeks. And so a lot of people in the underground community follow that. It's like, okay, be off of it. But she published a study where it was clear that it seems that the suppression of a psychedelic experience after stopping an SSRI lasts much longer than 4 weeks, actually. And for some people, that seems to go on months at least. So no one's done a study longer than that. But certainly it does appear that, unfortunately, yeah, there is this longer term impact of SSRIs. And in terms of discontinuing and that stuff, I would say that's, I usually work with people that are coming off of it to more, in a way, if they're, I usually there's a gauge of coming down is if, can someone feel emotion? Can they cry in the room with me? Are we working? Am I using sort of all the tools at my disposal? My interpersonal tools. I mean, and they're opening up and talking about things and touching things, and they're just not able to emote, like they're just incapable of crying. And I've seen SSRIs do that, right? And in a way, that's what we want. We want to not be depressed. So it's an antidepressant. So it's like, the way I work with people is like, okay, have you bought into this catharsis and sharing your emotion with me is important. Okay, if we're on that same page, let's start coming down until you start feeling, okay, but you're starting to feel, you're starting to cry. It may become somewhat overwhelming at times during the week. Okay, let's pause there. Let's not taper anymore. So I sort of, kind of like what we were saying really with microdosing, there isn't really a one size fits all. I very much work with the person. And maybe maybe it's a nice ending that, it actually reminds me a bit of what we were talking about with artistry before, right? To me, this is an art that I practice. And so, it's this, I've thought about, how could I teach? How could I write? But it's like this way, it's like, is this even possible? To there's clearly a lot of people that want and again deserve healing, yet there's such an artistry to it um that is really just getting to know the person that I'm working with, that it's hard to think of how does this fit into a current culture that is about scaling and scaling, really about how do we scale things, how do we mass produce things. I just don't think the two go hand in hand.
Thank you for all of this.
Yeah, this has been really fun.
It's so nice. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I will be in New York. I'm still trying to figure it out, whether it's May, end of April, May, beginning of June. I'm not sure, somewhere in there. And so I will let you know, and hopefully you'll be in the area and we
that'd be fun to meet up for sure.
Yeah, I'll come, I'll get in a car and I'll come drive up to you.
Sounds good. We'll finally get to go on a walk unless there's another eclipse or something that gets in the
No,
way.
an eclipse and a cold, but I won't let that stop me this time.
All right.
Thank you, Will. This was really a wonderful way to start my day. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
All right. Peace.
Bye.